Today we're going to be talking about chickens. We obviously had backyard chickens, and this is going to be about the things that we learned through that experience, things that we would possibly do a bit differently if we were to again to have chickens in a backyard space, and just the experiences we had that we didn't expect and did not read in the books.
One of the first things we dealt with was that cockerel fights are no joke, obviously, but we've met other people and we had neighbours that had cockerels. Some had cockerels from eggs and they were absolutely fine as adults and never fought. We found that they got to a stage in their maturity and it was overnight. They were absolutely fine with one another. The next morning we went down, graphic image coming, and they were killing each other. So I had to step in and we took the very much more aggressive of the two, and we had to dispatch him. But in doing so, I also realised the really maybe testosterone filled and aggressive cockerels made me feel somewhat less of a man, shall we say. Okay.
That as much as you're expanding on that one.
Yes, I don't want to go delve into the size of the
gonads.
Yes.
Along with cockerels getting aggressive at each other when they reach an age, they also very much have their favourites in terms of the ladies. In the books, we definitely read about the fact that hens can be mounted too often and end up with feathers coming away and ending up with sore and bald backs. But it didn't really elaborate on the fact that cockerels do end up with their favourites, in that the majority of our hens looked perfectly fine, happy, healthy, good-looking hens. But there was one that you could tell was the favourite from the cockerel because she had feathers missing out the back of her head and her back had become balder and balder and was getting sorer, and because it didn't have any feathers, it would get sunburn and just damaged generally. So yeah, we had to end up producing one of these saddles or jackets or whatever you want to call them. Jason might
chicken jumpers.
Jason might stick in a picture here. Yeah, to try and help, which coming from that saddle, when you put them on, as you can imagine, they're not that impressed, and the way she was running around trying to flap it off was quite amusing. But it needed to be done because she was getting so sore and it wasn't nice to look at, let alone how it must have felt. So yeah, cockerels definitely have their favourite ladies.
Overall, we were quite lucky with the different ailments that our chickens had and different illnesses. One of the things that I dealt with was a prolapse of a chicken, which was definitely something I'd not seen on videos before and I'd not done much research in. It's not very serious, but it can be if it's not fixed fairly quickly. And once it's happened once, it just keeps happening because basically it's stretched. Well, the way I took it is that it's their vent has
Cloaca.
Yeah, has stretched by a certain way and it's damaged, and therefore it can easily happen. And it's obviously because it's basically your insides coming out. It's if that gets dirty and infected, that's where the issue lies. Okay, it's in your eyes. Let me see if I can figure it out. We've got the sunlight coming in. Yeah, that's in my eyes. Okay, sorry about that. Who is next?
So a fact that a lot of people seem to forget, and even the government in their regulations, is that chickens are omnivores. And they will eat, just like us, they will eat vegetation as well as meat. So that's why they will go crazy for worms and for insects and whatnot. But with that fact, it's also the case of they will eat each other. This is something that we didn't end up seeing, but it was with our chickens because we happened to be away at the time and our neighbour was looking after our chickens. But one of them must have died, although it may have been helped along by the chickens. But Our lovely neighbour went into them one morning and found a half-eaten chicken, and they were in a closed-in space, so it was definitely not predators, but these chickens had eaten one of their own. And also with this fact that you also have to bear in mind is that if one of your chickens ends up with a sore on it or something that's red, the chickens are actually quite drawn to this fact and will actively kind of bully and attack that chicken more and make the situation a lot worse. So you have to bear that in mind, that if there is something like that on your chicken, you might be better off separating them, because others are likely to make the situation a lot worse, which could lead to death.
And that brings me on to talking about lice and mites, because one of the things that we did suffer with our chickens was they had lice, and that's where nearer the softer and moister areas of the chicken, so that's their belly and the vent, the lice would lay like hard eggs. We had one of our chickens that had it quite badly. The rest of them picked on that chicken, and that's what we first realized. I was still checking them probably once a week over, and it happened that quickly. We looked after the lice with a powder. I'll leave some descriptions of the products that we used. Generally they did work quite well, but one thing I did find is that it was similar to maybe like antibiotics, in that I used them until it went away by eye, and within a couple of weeks it'd come back again. Maybe need to do a bit more research on that. Please put some comments below if you've dealt with this before and you have tried and tested ways. But one way that I did was just out there powdering them almost every other day, every day when it was bad, and then sort of every other day to then every few days, and that was how we kept them at bay. We also had red mites, which some people I speak to say basically you just need to take chickens out of the coop and burn the coop, because once you've got them, that's it. We were quite lucky in that I was using a similar sort of powder. We also used it on the pigs that we had. That was just again a way of keeping them at bay. It did okay. We never had, although we had red mites and they were in the coop. Maybe because of the chickens weren't that filthy and they were allowed out in the garden quite early in the morning and weren't in the coop that often. They didn't suffer with it that much. So again, if you've dealt with them in the past, let us know kind of ways in which you've dealt with them, or maybe issues you've had.
Something, if you're considering backyard chickens, that you need to be very aware of. If you have chickens, you have rodents.
You called? Nick and Fetcher at your service.
This is nothing to do with food storage. We kept our food in food grade thick plastic barrels, and there was no way rodents were getting into those. Never had any issues with rodents getting into the food itself. The issue is chickens are messy eaters, basically, and that they like to kick around their food, they like to move it around, and they never truly clear it up. So because of this, obviously there is grain and layers, pellets and whatever left out. Even if you're not feeding them on the floor, it will end up on the floor, and the rodents will come because of that fact, because it's an easy meal. So yeah, unfortunately, just due to the nature of it, you're always going to have that problem. You can try and minimize it, but again, depending how you're choosing to minimize it, it isn't the best thing to do if you have livestock around. For instance, you don't want to be putting down poison because you don't know if your livestock could end up getting into it, let alone the effects that could have on the environment. If you end up poisoning a rodent, it goes away and it ends up with another creature ending up eating that and causing the poison to spread through the ecosystem. So it's not one that we like to go anywhere near anyway. So there are obviously other methods like water barrel methods to catch rodents and whatever, but it's something you need to be very much aware of. Also, if you have rodents, they're more likely to be going for your eggs.
Eggs from heaven! No, from above!
So obviously different coops can kind of help reduce that fact due to where the eggs end up being laid, but rodents can end up going after your eggs, and even if they don't take the egg away completely, they can end up breaking the egg, which that in itself leads to another problem, is that because that egg is then broken, the chickens are also likely to eat it, which you then need to be very careful with too, because it could get them into a habit of doing that, and you don't want them to get to the point where they're literally breaking and destroying and eating their own eggs constantly, because then it means you're not getting any for yourself. So this whole issue can spiral slightly, so you really do have to try and take some steps to reduce it.
Plus, you mentioned with the chickens not wanting to lay because the rats were getting in where the chickens were, they were then going and laying in the pig because they were with the pigs, so they were laying in the pig pen, and then the pigs were then just getting a nice egg breakfast every morning.
Yeah, so it's not the easiest problem to deal with, but there were some advantages to us keeping the chickens with the pigs, in that depending where you're putting the food down, again, this can cause issues in itself, is that if the pigs can then get to the food afterwards, at least they will clear it up. Obviously, you don't want them to be doing that too much because of the different minerals and stuff in the different foods, but it does reduce that slightly because at least the pigs are coming in and clearing up the food, so it's reducing the rodent attraction somewhat. But again, then you have to have methods of being able to feed your chickens first away from the pigs, otherwise the chickens will never end up with their food because the pigs eat it all. So
however, it does mean that you get chickens that really have no fear.
Nice, bad.
Some of the chickens we had, the rescue chickens that we had, because they had only known being fed in and around pigs as well, they would try and get the pigs food. So we'd feed them separately in their own area, and then we'd feed the pigs, and they'd run up to the pigs' food, leave their own because they're like, well, the pigs can't get to that, and they would fight the pigs who could
eat
a quick
them,
snap,
literally,
and they could eat them easily, and they were not bothered. Some of the things that we've said today sound a little negative, but they're more just things that we learn. Yeah, things to be aware of and things that we learn along the way. And this was in a setting where before we moved here, so we were it was basically a backyard homestead. It was a big garden, but it wasn't necessarily in any way, shape or form a farm or a small holding. So I'd like to end with something on a bit of a lighter note, and also kind of going forward, what I'd like to research more and try with the poultry that we get in the future, and that's that chickens can be trained, and alongside that, some poultry are definitely cleverer than others. So we had turkeys as well as chickens. Turkeys, in the research that or the videos that we watched and the research that we did, everyone says the same: turkeys are stupid and are the most stupid. They're like lemmings. If they can find a way to kill themselves, then they probably will. Whereas chickens, and we'd seen it with a lady that lived near us at the time, she had trained her chickens to, she could put her arm up and they'd jump up on the arm and she could feed the chickens. And other than training them when you want them to maybe go to bed or to get food or not to go in certain areas, there's not necessarily big reasons why you might want to train them, but it's quite fun. And I think what I found was that came from a place of them feeling safe around you. So I quite often would try and feed them from my hand to just get them used to me, because it was generally me picking them up, whether it be because I was dusting them or whatever. So just trying to get them used to, not all the time, me being being there and around them and potentially handling them, was then something that they necessarily didn't like. So I'm looking forward to training poultry on the homestead when we get more, and I want to get some funny looking ones too, but don't tell Alicia that.
So thanks for listening to our spiel about chickens. There'll be some more coming about pigs hopefully, so stay tuned.
Cheers.
Speak to you later.
Right then, audience, what
are you doing?
I'm trying to sort it out for you. Why? What do you think that I'm doing?
I'm gonna make it look weird and stupid.
Give you a wet willy.
I cannot see anything on that screen. It's just... I can see you enough at distance.
So I look good at a distance, but everything else you want it to be a bit closer.
I know what you're talking about.